Checking, mic check, testing. Good morning. Good to be back with you. My wife and I had I guess we just call it a vacation. It was supposed to be a retirement celebration that hasn't happened yet. We'll just call it a vacation. We had a great trip. I'm still jet lagged, but it's better today than the last couple of days. So look forward to being back with you. I want to share at the start of the lesson today an old video I shot a few years ago when I was talking about this subject, but I think it's an effective introduction to what I want to talk to you about today. Mike, you and Lori will recognize where this was filmed, but go ahead and let's see if we can show that now. In 2003, Judy and I came here to the Donaldson Church of Christ to start our ministry preaching here. And in one of our first Sundays, we went to lunch afterward with some of the elders and their wives. We were getting to know each other, sharing a few stories. They told me about some of the preachers they'd had in the past, well-known people like Bob Hendren and Randy Harris. Then they mentioned Harold Baker, who had taught speech at Lipscomb when my dad taught Bible there. And so I told them a story about Harold that my dad had always told me. Back in the late 60s, a preacher named Foy Wallace, who'd been well known in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, one of those contenders for the faith, defenders of orthodoxy, was known all across the churches of Christ for his writings and his speaking. And he came to town, held this gospel meeting, and was attacking the eggheads at the colleges that were teaching the things he disagreed with. And he was particularly targeting my dad at that meeting. You know, he was upset about teaching grace, teaching the unity of believers, teaching that the King James Version isn't the only inspired Bible. But he was attacking my dad at that meeting for being a liberal and said some things that really weren't true about my father. And Harold Baker got up at the end of that night, at that meeting, went up to the microphone and said, I know John McRay. I teach with him at Lipscomb. Some of the things said about him tonight are not true. That took a lot of guts at a Foy Wallace meeting in the 60s. And the elders of that church met that night, and they told Foy Wallace they wanted him to stop attacking people and just preach the gospel, and Wallace wouldn't do it. He wouldn't back down. And so they shut down the meeting. They shut down a Foy Wallace meeting in the 60s right here in Nashville. That took guts. But that always meant a lot to my dad, that Harold Baker, and Harold and Dad didn't always agree on everything, but Harold Baker stood up for my dad and supported him at a difficult time. And that encouraged my father. It meant a lot to him, and that story meant a lot to me. And so I started telling them this story. And as soon as I mentioned the name Foy Wallace, Rose, one of the wives there, picked up her napkin off the table at the restaurant and put it right over her head. And everybody started to laugh, and I wondered, what's this all about? And they told me that story happened at this church. A story I'd heard my whole life about Harold Baker encouraging my father happened at the very church that I had just come to be the preacher for, and I thought, I guess I'm in a good place. You know, it's unfortunate there are a whole lot more people in churches of Christ who know the name Foy Wallace than know the name Harold Baker. But I ask you, who would you rather be? Who would you rather be? One of the first Christian ministers that we read about in the book of Acts was a man named Stephen. And Stephen came under attack from the religious people of his day because he was preaching things they didn't want to hear. And so they attacked him. And then one day they stoned him to death. stoned him to death for saying things they didn't want to hear. And one of the people participating in that event was a young rabbi named Saul. Later, Saul himself became a Christian. Many of you know that story of this vision that he received when he was actually on the road going to another city to persecute Christians. And Jesus appeared to him and said, "What are you doing?" and called him to be a missionary. And that was the beginning of Saul's life that would lead him to become the Apostle Paul and the great missionary of the church. And so when Saul came to Jerusalem after his conversion, the church in Jerusalem was not ready to believe it. How were they to trust this guy? He had persecuted and killed Christians in their own city and had hunted them down in other cities, and they were not ready to believe. They didn't trust him. They didn't want him in the group. Somebody stood up for him. It was a man there among the Christians in Jerusalem named Joseph. And the apostles in Jerusalem had already given him a nickname. They called him Barnabas, which literally means son of encouragement, which is a figure of speech. It means the encouraging one. That was his nickname. That's what they called. Instead of calling him Joseph, they called him the encourager. And he stood up for Saul. And because he stood up for Saul, Saul got a chance to connect with the leaders in Jerusalem and get their support. And then they would partner in the ministry of spreading the gospel all through that part of the world. So as we think about the day that will come, hopefully sometime this summer, of a new minister arriving here, we need to think a little bit about who we're going to be to our minister. Are we going to be a Saul or a Barnabas? A Foy Wallace or a Harold Baker? So as we get closer to the day when a new minister will come, I just want to talk with you a little bit today, kind of practically, about your relationship with him. It's a lesson that I call the choice to encourage, or sometimes I actually like to call it how not to kill a minister. Not because I think anybody's going to literally throw rocks at him, but sometimes it can feel that way. When he comes, we want to be a Barnabas to Saul, not a Saul to Stephen. And I don't think that's going to be a big problem here. You've been a real encouragement to me in my ministry with you for the last year or so. You're not like another church I know that just hired their fourth minister in 6 years. I don't know who accepted that position, but that's not a place you want to go as a minister. And when our next minister comes, some of us are going to like his preaching better than others. But he's not coming to be everybody's favorite preacher. That's not what God calls him to. He's coming to lead us on Jesus' mission. That's his calling. And so we're not looking to get somebody else like Ryan, or somebody like me, or somebody like anybody. We're looking for the one that God will call to lead us on our mission. So I want you to say with me, our next minister is not Ryan. Our next minister is not Ryan. Say, our next minister is not Rob. Our next minister is not Rob. It's not what we're praying for, looking for. Instead, I'd like us to say together that our next minister will be called by God and by this church to lead us into a new future. You hear that? That's what we're praying for. Let's say that together. Our next minister will be called by God and by this church to lead us into a new future. We have a new future in front of us. Some new things are going to come. Don't know what they all are. New opportunities, new challenges. We want somebody to come and walk with us and lead us into that new future. And our call is to support and encourage him in that work, in that calling. So, in a sort of a practical lesson today, I want to briefly talk to you about 5 things that you can do to welcome and support your new minister. Some of this I've adapted from Tim Woodruff, who founded Interim Ministry Partners, the group I work with. He had 8. I'm just going to do 5 things that you can do. And the first is very simply to be a Barnabas, to be the encourager. You know, we aren't all a Barnabas by nature, but we can learn to practice encouragement. There's simple things you can do sometimes that you'd be surprised how much they'll mean to a minister. You know, ministers are used to going out and standing in the back as people leave, and people go by and say, nice sermon, nice sermon, nice sermon. That's nice. But I tell you what means more than nice sermon is when somebody stops on a Sunday where something meant something deeper or special to them and stop and say that. That's really an encouragement, because every week's not going to be that to everybody. But not just compliments. It's the response that says, I appreciated something I heard today that touched me. That's an encouragement, because that's what ministers are here to do. When they're speaking, they're hopefully saying something that will bring a message that encourages you, that challenges you, and it's helpful to know sometimes that it made a difference. But it's about other things in life too, just kind words, words of support, especially if you know they're going through some challenging time. Appreciate the work you do, whatever it is. A note can mean a lot, a simple note. I know we're kind of past the days of handwritten notes, but an email, a text, or something. But handwritten notes have more impact than you'd realize because we don't do them anymore. I was part of a church a little while back where they had what they called the encouragement ministry. There was a woman in the church who started this. She was one of the sweetest, kindest, most encouraging people you would ever know. And she developed this, the church adopted it, where they put in the pews, like, we don't have these, but, a lot of churches on the backs of seats, there's a little pocket, and they'll have cards in there, attendance cards, prayer request cards, those kinds of things. They had a card in there, in addition to an attendance card or whatever. It was called the encouragement card. It had this verse from 1 Thessalonians, encourage one another with these words. And each week we would pause in the worship service for a few moments and allow people to write a note of encouragement to someone in the church, to a Christine at a time of a family loss, or a Marjorie, to someone whose baby's in the hospital and we're praying for them, to a Sunday school teacher we want to thank for teaching our kids, whatever it might be. We would write these words of encouragement on the cards, and they passed them in. They would collect them all, like collecting an offering. And the encouragement ministry would meet that week and mail them to people. They would get their addresses from the church directory and actually put them in envelopes and mail them, so they would all go out from the church that week. And that was an encouragement to the whole church, but it was to me. I would often get notes like that, being in a high visible role, that had something meaningful and encouraging on the note. Some people didn't use them that way. Some people viewed them as feedback cards. And so often encouragement cards had criticisms on them. So the staff came to call them discouragement cards. There's a card that says on it from 1 Thessalonians, encourage one another with these words, and what followed was not encouraging. One day, the sister who started that ministry found out what the ministers were, staff members were calling those cards, and it just broke her heart. So I had to get up one Sunday and rebuke and exhort, as Paul says. Yeah. I'll never forget one Sunday, on my birthday, I got an encouragement card that just kind of ripped me up for something that this member didn't like. And what made it worse, that member was in my small group. What are we doing? What are we doing? Now, you don't have to start an encouragement card ministry, but I want to encourage you to be encouragers. With each other, not just with the minister. But especially as he's coming to serve you and devoting his life and his work to this church, be an encourager. Second thing you can do is to guard your tongue and guard your ears. And over the time that I've been doing this work and sharing these thoughts with different churches, this has become a bigger and bigger problem in our culture, our society around us, because social media is teaching us a level of rudeness I never remember seeing in our culture. Part of that is because we will say things about people and to people we wouldn't say in person. We'll say it in social media, but the problem now is because we're getting so used to saying it in social media, we'll now say it to people's face. And we're just becoming a ruder and ruder nation. Leaders of our nation are leading us to be ruder and ruder with each other. We've got to guard against that. Be careful everywhere about what you're posting on social media and what you're saying to people and about people. But when we talk specifically about our relationship with our minister, don't say anything about him that you wouldn't have said to him. And these days, I'm not sure whether even that's a good test, because I'm worried about what we'll say to people. But in Ephesians, Paul says, only let words come out of your mouth that are good for upbuilding. Now, he wasn't just talking about what you say to a minister. He's talking about what we say to each other. But that's true for our relationship with a minister. Think about it. Is what I'm saying upbuilding? Is it going to help? Is it going to build somebody up? Or am I just venting? Am I going to tear down or build up? But it's not just about what I say. It's also what I listen to. Be careful not to listen to slander and backbiting. Sometimes, you can just walk away from some of that. Or better yet, consider saying to a brother or sister, we're talking here about somebody we love. Somebody called by God. Maybe we want to be careful how we say what we say. Let's guard against the damaging, hurtful words. Third thing I would say is support their friendships. This may come as a surprise to most of you, but ministry is considered one of the loneliest professions. Don't you stop and think about that. Ministry is considered one of the loneliest professions. How can that be? We're in the middle of people all the time. We get attention all the time. We're talking with people and to people all the time. How can it be lonely? want you to think for a minute about friendship and what you can do with friends and how friends matter. If you're a minister, where do you go? Who do you talk with if you need to vent about your job? You don't do that with church folk. What happens if I form a closer relationship with Charlie than I do with Barry? Or a closer friendship with Barry than I do with Mike? In church, people get jealous. Why is the preacher? You know, he has favorites. That's what they'll say. He has favorites. He has this in-group, you know. And he plays favorites. And so ministers find themselves unable to openly have friendships in the church because people don't like it. They feel jealous. They feel cut out. But ministers need friends. They need a small group. But if the minister's in your small group, that means he's not in your small group. And now we wonder, well, why is he in that group? Why isn't he in our group? He must like them better than he likes me. But they need a group. And they'll pick a small group often for different reasons. One point in our life, we picked a small group that was made up of parents of teenagers because we were parents of teenagers. And we could go and our kids could be together and we could be together, and it worked well at that time in our lives and worked well in that church. But there's another time where we picked a group where we were the oldest people in the group. All the young adults had kids. We were like the grandparents in the group. Yeah. But we picked it because we felt it was important at this time in the church's life to support the young people coming into the church and making sure they felt a part of the family. So we opened our home and they came into our home every week. We didn't do it because we were at the same shared life place. We did it because we felt a need to serve that group. There's a lot of reasons why people, sometimes they will pick it just because their good friend is in that group and they need a friend, you know. And so I encourage you not to be jealous of their friendships, not to be jealous of the groups they're a part of. In fact, to encourage it, to be glad they're a part of a group, to be glad they have supportive friends. They need it just as much as you need it in the church. But what comes with that? If you're in a position to wind up the friend of the next minister, or he's in your small group, I want to challenge you to guard that, to honor that, to be careful with that. One of the most painful things I ever saw in a church was a church I served where a colleague of mine was in small group in our church at a time when he and his wife were having some struggles, and they openly shared with their group and prayed with their group about it. And a little later, our church went through a really stressful period over an issue, and there was some conflict. One of the members of their small group wound up at odds with the minister, different place on this issue. And he used some of what had been shared in the confidence of that small group to attack the minister. That's why sometimes when they're teaching and training ministers, they warn ministers about being careful about forming close friendships in the church. Because it can blow back on you. So often ministers, close friends, will be ministers in other churches around. Because they can open up and be honest with each other and understand what they're going through. So if you wind up a good friend or a member of a small group with a minister, honor that, protect that, be careful about it. Fourth thing, And maybe one of the most important things you can do to encourage a minister is to engage in the mission, to get off the bench and get in the game. He's not coming here just to preach to an audience. He's coming to help us engage in the mission of God. And he needs people who partner and join in and be engaged in the work. And that's such an encouragement to have people who work side by side with you, serve side by side with you. Be involved. He can't do this by himself. Please don't ever say we're hiring a minister to grow the church. We're hiring a minister to reach the lost. We're hiring a minister to accomplish the mission. No. We're partnering with a minister. We're not hiring him as an employee. We're partnering with a minister who will lead us on a mission, not do the mission. And so you can support the mission, serve, volunteer, find a part to play in what we do going forward. Look for ways to engage. And then finally, respect his calling. You won't always agree with things he says. I can guarantee that. I pretty much bet my house that I have said something in the last year or so that you haven't agreed with. But respect is not about agreement. Respect is about honoring someone's calling, respecting the responsibility they have, the work that they have to do. It's respecting his study. It's respecting what God has called him to do, and to respect his voice enough to go home and think about it and pray about it even when you think you disagree with it, rather than just reacting. In 1 Thessalonians, Paul says, "We ask you, brothers and sisters, to respect those who labor among you and lead you in the Lord and admonish you. Respect them. And esteem them very highly in love because of their work." You hear that? Not because you agree with them. Esteem them very highly in love because of the work they do. Because they're laboring among you, and they're leading, and they're teaching and admonishing. Respect that. Esteem that highly. Value it. Honor them for it. Do it in love, and be at peace among yourselves. We don't need people making war in the church. We need to be at peace and respect. And that language also works for our shepherds, and it works for our Sunday school teachers, and it works for anyone who's leading in the church, to respect them and love because of their work. Pray for your minister. Pray for God to lead you in the Lord. Pray for an open mind and an open heart to listen. Because if you're praying for your minister, you know, it's hard to kill somebody you're praying for. Our next minister will be called by God and by this church to lead us into a new future. Let's respect that calling. I want to close by briefly pointing to two examples from the life of Jesus, or from traditions about that life. There are two statues in Rome of two Christian saints, Saint Veronica on the left and Saint Longinus on the right. And if you're not Catholic, you're probably thinking, I never heard of Veronica and Longinus. They are not in my Bible. So they're traditional names that have been given to two people in the story of Jesus' death, the story of his crucifixion. Longinus is the traditional name that was given to the Roman soldier who stabbed Jesus with a spear. Remember the story on the cross when wanted to check and see if he was dead, and stabbed him with a spear. Tradition says that he became a Christian and was eventually martyred for his own faith, that he too faced death like Jesus had faced. Don't you know that his entire life, between his conversion and his own death, that he thought back to the day he participated in the crucifixion of Jesus? You imagine the regret he must have felt for being a part of what was done to Jesus that day. Veronica is a traditional name given to one of the women who Jesus met. If you remember the stories, he's carrying his cross out to be crucified. There are women weeping as he goes. And there's a tradition that one of them took her veil and wiped Jesus' face with it, wiped the blood and sweat from his face. In fact, if you look closely at the image there, it shows the outline of a face. The tradition grew that Jesus' face actually appeared on the veil after she wiped it. It became one of the relics of the church, as it was called. But that story, any of you ever see the 14 Stations of the Cross depicted in a church? Or maybe you were somewhere where during Holy Week, at Good Friday or something, people would do a prayer walk of the 14 stations. Most of the 14 stations are actually events mentioned in the story of Jesus' crucifixion. And this is one of them, Veronica's veil is one of the 14 stations. I'm not concerned this morning about whether there was actually a woman who wiped his face with a veil. I just want us to think about that image. The contrast between this woman who responds to Jesus with compassion in his darkest hour and one who participated in wounding him and killing him. To me, they represent a choice between being a comforting presence in the family of God or a wounding presence in the family. A choice between compassion or injury. Not just with the new minister and his family, but with each other. Who do you want to be? Who do you want to be? The story of compassion or the story of harm? We're about to sing a song about brotherly love in the family of God. It's an old traditional song called How Sweet, How Heavenly. The idea of the song is it's a heavenly thing when we delight in one another, when we follow the Word of God and loving each other. And so I want us to sing this song as a song that expresses our desire to commit to being with each other a Barnabas, to being with our next minister a Barnabas, to be a people who delight in the love and support and encouragement of the people of God. Can we commit to do that, sisters and brothers? Let's do it. Let's stand and sing.